Hi, my name is Catherine Los. My interest in supporting women during their childbearing years began when I was still a child. I am the second oldest of 7 children and was always very involved in caring for my younger siblings, as well as supporting my mother, who survived 6 miscarriages and 7 live births. Birth was something that was happening all around me. However, it was confined to the hospital, often treated as an emergency, and the women around me giving birth were martyrs, and the responsibility of birth outcomes lay in the hands of experts. Absolute trust in these experts was ingrained in the culture of my family. These experts my family revered were religious, medical, and academic. Cultivating trust in one's own intuition and taking responsibility for one's own physical, emotional, and spiritual health was not a skill I learned growing up, and I remember experiencing deep frustration and grief from feeling controlled by these experts. From a girl's first period, her first sexual experience, her first birth, and all the way through menopause, she is measured and monitored. I experienced this personally and witnessed this all around me. There was this veil of mystery surrounding what took place in our very own bodies, and the person holding the key to this mystery was shockingly an older man who manifested as doctor, priest, or teacher. This felt wrong to me on many levels, but I wasn't able to really understand or have a reason to challenge it until I gave birth myself. I became a mother when I was living in Greece at the age of 21, and even though my son's birth was swift and uncomplicated, I ended up with any intervention the hospital had to offer. I came out of this experience quite traumatized, but absolutely in love with my baby nonetheless. Being separated from him for 5 hours immediately following his birth, for no good reason except that it was hospital policy, was incredibly painful for me, as I'm sure it was for him, and it triggered an awakening process in me. It was the first time I had a strong reason to find my voice and advocate for this perfect little human who was completely dependent on me and needed me to stand up for him and protect him. I went on to conceive 10 children, of whom 6 have made it earthside. For my second birth, I chose a different hospital with a different doctor, and this birth was more on my terms. I was neither cut nor shaved. My daughter and I were not separated, and I went home just a few hours after her birth. Our little family then moved to England, and my third baby was miscarried. Miscarriage was an emotionally loaded topic for me, as I had witnessed tremendous lack of understanding and compassion from doctors and religious leaders alike when my mother lived through hers. I nonetheless honored this short life by naming my baby and deflecting any guilt set on my shoulders by religious convictions of my past. I enrolled in a doula course in London, back when this calling was so fresh it hardly had a name, led by gentle birth pioneers Michelle O'Daunt and Liliana Lammers. This was a groundbreaking, eye-opening event for me. I got pregnant shortly after and experienced a home water birth for the first time. My huge, overdue baby was born without a hitch, and I was on a natural high. I attended my first 3 births as a doula when he was 5 and 6 months old, and witnessed the strength and beauty of women birthing on their own terms. As I attended more births, I began to see my role as organic in helping women to have great first births, as well as helping others recover and heal from previous traumatic births and go on to experience an empowering one. When I was 8 months pregnant with my next baby, I felt him somersault in my womb and understood that he was breech. I did tilts, moxibustion, and other techniques, but my heart wasn't really in it. I had a deep sense that this was his position of preference and that he was doing well, so I decided to let him be. I read as much as I could find on physiological breech birth and found an independent midwife who was experienced in assisting this variation of normal. He ended up initiating his labor 3 weeks past his estimated due date. His labor was so fast we didn't have time to fill the birth pool, so I birthed him in the bathtub in under an hour. He was perfect, and I was ecstatic. I learned to trust my body and my baby more deeply. I learned that birth could be pleasurable, and finally threw off the last shadows of the notion that women must suffer in childbirth. I continue to attend births in a variety of settings: home, birthing centers, hospitals, and even a barge boat, and learned something about myself and about birth from each one. My next birth experience was an ectopic pregnancy, which became an emergency and cost me my fallopian tube. Despite the trauma of this experience, I was able to have an open grieving process once home with my family, naming this baby and having a celebration of her short life. At the same time, we pulled our two oldest out of school and embarked on a life-learning journey with them. My husband and I wanted to live more intentionally and according to conscience. During my next pregnancy, I was aware of some people from our old circles considering us too radical or too idealistic. Their disapproval was often hurtful, but forced us to really examine our life and our goals. I do believe that each child deserves to be yearned for, cherished, and loved. I know from experience that a large, eco-conscious family can have a smaller footprint than others. It all depends on our everyday choices, such as what menstrual products we use and diapers, our birthing location, our medical choices, what we eat, our living situation, transportation choices, etc., etc. That baby was born at home in the pool, which her siblings kept topping off, as hers was my longest labor. My youngest child was born a couple of years later, and he was my first experience of free birth. By then, I had complete trust in my body, my baby, and my intuition. His birth was fun. I laughed and danced and sang and hopped into the pool, and he was there. I do believe that peace on earth begins with birth. I do believe conscious conception, gentle birth, peaceful parenting, and loving families will heal and uplift generations. I know that becoming an Indie Birth Midwife is the conglomeration of my life's work so far as mother and birth keeper. Thank you for joining.